I see them, sir. Prepare the men!
July 16th, 1940. Berlin is heavy with summer heat. And inside the corridors of power, the war appears, at least on paper, to be approaching its conclusion. France has collapsed with astonishing speed. The German flag now flies from the Channel coast. From Calais to Cherbourg, German commanders stand on the edge of Europe and stare across a narrow strip of water at the last. Major enemy in the west. Britain remains. Beaten, isolated, and apparently exposed. To many in the German high command, the situation feels familiar. In continental warfare, this is the moment when the defeated opponent recognizes reality. Armies destroyed, territory lost, allies gone. Negotiations usually follow. Hitler himself issues Directive Number 16 ordering preparations for a possible landing in Britain. Even then, the wording reveals uncertainty. This is not yet a firm decision. It is framed as a contingency, a measure to be ready in case Britain refuses to accept defeat, and that refusal is already. Puzzling German leaders, Britain's army has been driven from the continent. Its heavy equipment abandoned on the beaches of Dunkirk. Its allies are gone. Its skies will soon face German bombers. And yet London shows no sign of surrender. No emissaries. No serious negotiations. No acceptance of Germany's new European order from the German perspective. This seems irrational, but the confusion runs deeper than morale or politics. It reflects a fundamental difference in how the two sides understand war itself. Most senior German commanders had been shaped by a continental tradition. Victory meant destroying the enemy's main field armies, seizing key territory, and forcing a political decision quickly. In Poland, in Norway, in France, this logic had delivered spectacular success. Speed, concentration, decisive blows. Once momentum was achieved, resistance collapsed. Britain did not fit that pattern as an island power. Britain had never relied solely on a single decisive land battle to survive. Over centuries, it had learned a different lesson. Land defeats could be absorbed if the sea remained open. Armies could be rebuilt if trade continued. Power did not vanish overnight if the state remained connected to global resources to Britain. War was rarely about one moment. It was about endurance. German planners could see the Royal Navy on their maps. They acknowledged it in briefings. But too often, it was treated as a problem to be worked around rather than the central fact of Britain's survival. An invasion plan could be drafted. Barges could be gathered. Timetables could be drawn. But beneath all of it lay an uncomfortable question. Could Germany control the Channel long enough to make any of it real? And behind that question was another, more dangerous one. Could air power alone force Britain to collapse politically? Even within German assessments, doubts surfaced. Control of the air was uncertain. Control of the sea was even more questionable. Germany's navy was small, damaged, and outmatched. Its transport fleet consisted largely of river barges never designed for open water, let alone under fire. Meanwhile, Britain was already shifting its mindset in London. The war was no longer being framed as something to be won quickly. It was being reorganized as a long struggle. Economic warfare was tightened. Atlantic supply routes were prioritized. The defense of the home islands was treated not as a final stand, but as the foundation for continuing the war indefinitely. Churchill's strategic instincts reflected this culture. When direct confrontation promised disaster, Britain had historically chosen indirect pressure, blockades, peripheral theaters, gradual strangulation of an enemy's economy. Expansion of the conflict until Britain's global reach and industrial depth could outweigh early defeats. So when German commanders asked, often sincerely, why won't Britain negotiate? They were asking from inside their own assumptions. Britain was not trying to win July 1940. Britain was trying to avoid losing it. The goal was not to defeat Germany immediately. It was to survive as an armed island, keep access to the oceans, preserve the fleet, protect the air force, maintain political cohesion. As long as those conditions held, time itself could be turned into a weapon. This difference was rooted in geography. For Britain, the Royal Navy was not just another branch of the military, it was the state's strategic shield. When armies failed on land, the fleet kept the nation alive. If sea lanes remained open, Britain could import food, fuel, and raw materials. It could shift forces across its empire. It could rebuild an army in safety. And if those sea lanes came under threat, Britain's response was not to gamble everything on a single decisive land campaign. It was to widen the struggle. Convoys, distant bases, economic warfare, pressure applied across time and space rather than in one violent stroke. German invasion. Planning in 1940 exposed how difficult this mindset was to grasp. Directive 16 demanded conditions that were revealing. The Luftwaffe had to defeat the RAF. The channel had to be secured. British naval forces had to be neutralized long enough for the crossing. These were not technical details. They were admissions. They acknowledged that Britain's true center of gravity was not an army in the field, but the ability to remain connected to the world while denying Germany a clean, decisive solution. German leaders often interpreted Britain's refusal to surrender as emotional stubbornness or national pride. In reality, it was calculation. Cold, deliberate, and rooted in experience. Hold the islands. Keep the fleet intact. Preserve fighter command. Ensure Britain remained a base from which the war could continue. Germany, by contrast, kept searching for the moment when battlefield dominance would translate automatically into political collapse. Britain was actively working to erase that moment entirely. This is why German commanders could win battles and still misunderstand the war they were fighting. They were looking for surrender. Britain was reorganizing the conflict into something Germany could not easily end, and that brings us to the next question. If invasion was the supposed answer, could Germany actually meet the conditions required to make it possible? August 11th, 1940, Bentley Priory, just outside London. Inside the headquarters of RAF Fighter Command, the war is reduced to symbols on a wall map. Colored markers slide across Britain as reports arrive from radar stations, observer posts, and sector controls. What appears chaotic in the sky is being shaped into a system. Asterisk. German commanders believed they were approaching a familiar problem. To clear the way for invasion, the RAF had to be destroyed. Once air superiority was achieved, the Royal Navy could be kept at bay, and the crossing could begin. Asterisk, the logic was sound for a continental war. Asterisk, but Britain's air defense was not designed to be smashed in a single blow. It was designed to survive. Asterisk radar stations along the coast provided early warning. The Royal Observer Corps filled gaps inland. Information flowed into filter rooms, where it was assessed, organized, and passed to sector stations. Fighters were not thrown blindly into the air. They were committed only when and where they were needed. Asterisk, this mattered enormously. Asterisk. Instead of exhausting its squadrons through constant engagement, Britain practiced economy of force. Fighters were conserved. Pilots were rotated. Aircraft were repaired and returned to service. The system absorbed pressure without collapsing. Asterisk from the German side. The Battle of Britain often appeared as a war of attrition. Aircraft destroyed. Airfields bombed. Sorties flown. But the British system did not behave like a single target that could be broken. Damage in one area could be compensated elsewhere. Losses could be managed. This had direct consequences for any invasion plan. Operation Sea Lion was never just about landing troops. It was about time. Slow-moving barges would need hours, even days, to cross the channel. They would need protection during unloading and resupply. All of this would take place under the shadow of the Royal Navy. Asterisk German leaders understood this, at least in theory. The Luftwaffe was expected to do double duty. Destroy the RAF and prevent British warships from intervening. Even German naval officers doubted this could be done. The Kriegsmarine was too weak. Its surface fleet was limited. Its ability to challenge the Royal Navy directly was minimal. Asterisk, post-war assessments confirm these doubts. German naval leaders questioned whether air power alone could reliably stop British destroyers and cruisers from attacking invasion convoys, especially at night or in poor weather. Asterisk, British commanders were under no illusions. They did not expect an easy victory. Their objective was simpler and more realistic. Deny Germany the conditions required for a decisive landing. Keep fighter command operational. Keep the fleet intact. Force Germany into a war of friction rather than resolution. Asterisk, this is why German commanders often misread British behavior. Bombing raids were counted. Aircraft losses were tallied. But the real measure of success was whether Britain's system continued to function. And it did. While this air struggle unfolded, another war was already shaping Britain's fate, one that many German planners still treated as secondary. Asterisk. September 3rd, 1939, the Western approaches off Ireland. Even before Germany had identified what it believed would be the decisive battle in the West, Britain was already fighting for survival at sea. Asterisk. Merchant ships were the lifeblood of the British state. Food, oil, raw materials. Without them, endurance was impossible. The Atlantic was not a distant theater. It was a front line measured in cargoes delivered and days survived. Asterisk, British strategy reflected this reality. Merchant ships were organized into convoys and escorted by warships and, where possible, aircraft. To an outsider, this might appear defensive, but it was deeply strategic. Asterisk, convoys concentrated protection. They reduced the number of vulnerable targets. They allowed escorts to fight back immediately when attacked. On the vast scale of the Atlantic, finding a convoy could be harder than finding scattered single ships. Asterisk, German U-boat commanders understood the mathematics of tonnage war, sink shipping faster than it could be replaced, starve Britain into submission. But from Berlin, there remained a belief that psychological collapse would come first. Through bombing, through invasion threats, through dramatic blows. Asterisk, Britain's response was methodical rather than dramatic. Improve convoy procedures. Increase escort production. Extend air coverage. Accept losses without panic. Keep the flow moving. Asterisk, this was Britain's way of war in action. System versus system. Organization versus disruption. Endurance over spectacle. Asterisk, as this maritime struggle expanded, another reality emerged. Britain's strategy assumed allies would matter. It was designed to keep the country fighting until the balance of global resources turned decisively against Germany. Asterisk, Germany, by contrast, still searched for a single final decision. Asterisk, that search would only grow more desperate as the war widened. December 7th, 1941, London receives news from the Pacific. That changes the shape of the war overnight. What had begun as a European conflict is now unmistakably global. Asterisk, for Britain. This moment confirms a strategy that had been in motion for years. Asterisk, German leaders had spent immense effort trying to force Britain into a final decision. Air attack, submarine warfare, the threat of invasion. Yet Britain's entire strategic instinct had been focused on preventing closure, on keeping the war open until Germany faced pressures it could not control. Asterisk, time. Britain's thinking was never neutral. Asterisk, time meant expanded production. Time meant stronger alliances. Time meant economic warfare tightening its grip. Time meant Germany fighting not one opponent, but a coalition whose combined resources dwarfed its own. Asterisk. This is why German leaders so often misread British persistence. From their perspective, continued resistance looked irrational. From Britain's perspective, it was logical. Asterisk, Britain was not rejecting peace out of pride. It was shaping the war's future. Asterisk, the emphasis on sea power was central to this. Convoys, escorts, and naval control were not ends in themselves. They were the foundation of coalition warfare. As long as Britain remained an armed island, it could host allied air forces, train armies, coordinate shipping, project power outward. Asterisk, even the language of German invasion planning revealed the problem. Sea lion depended on conditions that had to be met first. Air superiority, naval suppression, secure transport. Britain's entire strategy was designed to deny those conditions indefinitely. Asterisk. German commanders were often brilliant at operational art, breakthroughs, encirclements, rapid decisions. But Britain shifted the contest upward, from operations to strategy, from strategy to economics. From economics to coalition management, asterisk, these were arenas where battlefield. Victories alone were insufficient. Asterisk, the convoy system illustrates this perfectly. It lacked drama. It offered no decisive battle. But it embodied Britain's logic. Manage risk. Absorb losses. Keep moving. Deny the enemy a knockout blow. Asterisk, the same logic guided British intelligence, scientific research, and industrial mobilization. Progress was cumulative. Gains were incremental. The system improved over time rather than collapsing under pressure. Asterisk, once the Grand Alliance fully formed, the contrast became overwhelming. German commanders could win battles and still lose the war's direction. Britain had turned survival into strategy. Asterisk, by late 1941, the war Britain had chosen was no longer theoretical. Germany now faced enemies whose combined industrial output and manpower far exceeded its own. Early victories could no longer be translated into final outcomes. Asterisk, post-war German reflections return repeatedly to this theme. Britain was not defeated because it was never forced into the kind of war Germany knew how to finish. German strength lay in momentum. Britain's strength lay in resilience. Asterisk, when momentum stalled. Asterisk, when endurance became decisive. Germany had no answer. Asterisk, this contrast explains more than a failed invasion plan. It explains a fundamental misunderstanding. German commanders kept waiting for Britain's breaking point. Britain was actively working to remove that concept from the war entirely. Asterisk. The British system did not promise quick victory. It promised continuity. As long as Britain remained supplied, armed, and politically intact, Germany's early success could not be converted into final victory. Asterisk, every year the war continued, shifted the balance. Further against the Reich, asterisk, air defense denied a clean solution from the sky. Sea power kept Britain alive and connected. Economic warfare strained Germany's access to resources. Alliance building transformed a regional conflict into a global contest of production and endurance. Asterisk. This was the real battlefield. Asterisk, Germany excelled at winning battles. Britain focused on surviving wars. Asterisk, one system required rapid success. The other could absorb failure. When success slowed, Germany weakened. When time passed, Britain grew stronger. Asterisk, understanding this difference reshapes how we see. 1940. Britain did not defeat Germany by outmatching it blow for blow. It defeated Germany by refusing to be finished. Asterisk, by staying in the war long enough for time, industry, and alliances to become weapons. Asterisk, German commanders searched for surrender. Britain prepared for survival. Asterisk, and in the end, survival was enough.